Top 15 abandoned cities in Russia. It is almost possible to calculate the exact number of abandoned towns and villages in the vast area of the former USSR. The political, economic, as well as the geological realities have left many objects behind the modern life. Abandoned villages of Russia or abandoned military facilities can be found in any region of the Russian Federation. But let us not go too far into the causes of the process, but simply imagine abandoned cities in Russia that have become the silent ghosts of the past.
First,
the old Gubaha, Perm Krai. Now it's a ghost town, and one the cold center of the Perm region dates back to 1778, when the first mines were laid here. Researchers and workers who came to the region settled in a settlement of the bank of Kosva. Coal mining industry of the Krai was rapidly developing, and in 1941 the old Gubaha restored the status of the town. Schools, the houses of culture worked, the railway passed through the town, but prosperity did not last long. The coal deposit quickly exhausted, and in the early 90s people left the city and it added to the list of dead cities in Russia.
second,
Halmer-Yu, Komi Republic. In the early 40s, geological expedition of G. Ivanov found here coal, so necessary to the Soviet state during the war. In 1943, in the settlement already 250 people lived, and in 1957 the mine began to give the first coal to the mountain. Probably the basis of this place of city at once was doomed to failure. In fact, Halmer-Yu, in translation from Nenets language, the river in a value of death. The locals had long considered these places sacred and both their dead relatives here to be buried in the permafrost of the valley. In 1993, due to unprofitability, a mine was shut down, and 2 years later residents were forcibly evicted from their homes by Ottoman forces.
third,
Colendo, Sakhalin Oblast. In the 1960s, the development of oil fields of Sakhalin began and settlements began to emerge near them. Thus, in 1963, a town of oilmen, Colendo, appeared on the map. The village got its romantic name from a nearby lake in the northern part of the island. The oil-bearing region was developing, but oil reserves were rapidly depleted. Businesses were closing, and people began leaving Colendo. The last point in the town's history was the 1995 earthquake, and the authorities decided to evict the inhabitants. By 2002, there were not a single person left in Colendo. It is now a dead zone, but formerly the settlement status has not been abolished.
fourth,
Industrial, the Komi Republic. At the end of the 40s of the last century, 2 mines, central and industrial, began to be built in the site of the future urban settlement. The new settlement was named after by the second one in 1956, industrial, as well as many mining towns in the region, directly subordinated to Vologda. By the end of the 70s, the population of the industrial town had reached the mark of 15,000 people. In the early 90s, the coal industry was hit by the crisis. In the impetus for the closure of the city was the 1998 explosions at the central, which claimed the lives of 27 miners. The dead 19 miners were never found, and only 8 of them were brought off the surface. The mines were closed, and the city was gradually empty. It was officially closed in 1209.
5th.
Jubilee. Perm region. The list, which includes Russian brooches, continues the Jubilee, founded in 1957. The city grew up around the Shumikinskaya mine. It was the closure of the mine, which has not yet fully depleted its resources, that led to the desolation of the city. Abandoned houses in Jubilee are slowly began dismantled. In the industrial site of the closed mine were equipped with a colony for prisoners. The abandoned town also has its own landmark. In 1993, a native of Jubilee, Illinois, presented the town residence of SAU Ishu 152. So stands a fighting car on a pedestal among the collapsing city.
6th.
Eultin. Chukotka Autonomous Okrug. Lost cities in Siberia have appeared for various reasons, but it is mainly the closures of mining enterprises that feed the settlements. Eultin, named so by Mount Eultin, traces its history back to 1937, when large deposits of polymetallic materials were discovered here. The future settlement, whose population in 1989 was almost 6,000 people, started with 2 plywood houses and several tents. Over time, mining of polymetals became unprofitable, and the map of abandoned settlements in Russia was added to the new site when the last inhabitants left the town of Eultin in 2002.
7th.
Nizhneyansk, Yakutia. For many years, starting from the mid-30s of the 20th century, the village in the delta of Yana was the most important cargo delivery point to the remote northern regions of Yakutia. In 1954, the construction of a large port began here, and next to it grew a village which was named Nizhneyansk. Nearby, there was a built and near-port runway 1,700 meters long. In 2012, due to unprofitability, there were no regular flights at the airport, and the population of Nizhneyansk began to move to other settlements.
8th.
Courche 2, Ryazan region. The settlement was named after Lithuanian exiles who were exiled by the Tsarist government in the Meshchersky forest, and the area was strongly resembling their native Curonian spite. With the advent of Soviet power, the forest began to be harvested here, and from 1927 it was sent by rail to Vladimir and Ryazan. The working village began to get upset quickly, but in 1936 a terrible fire destroyed the settlement. The fire came from the south and caught people by surprise. No more than 20 people survived out of 1,000 inhabitants. Before the war, a large icon cross was erected in the site of the common grave of lodgers and their family members.
9th.
Finval, Kamchatka. The military camp of the Soviet submarines in the Bichovinskaya Bay was also called Bichovika, and also Petropavlovsk Kamchatsky 54 is classified. The town was founded in the early 60s, and in 1971 there were already based 12 large submarines of the Pacific Fleet. There was no land communication with the settlement, but once a week there was a ship going here. There was a post office, a school and a kindergarten in the town. In 1996, the garrison was disbanded, and the inhabitants of Finval were relocated and the boats were moved to other bases. Now the empty of and almost destroyed houses have been written off from the Russian Ministry of Defense.
10,
Alykel, Taimyr Autonomous District. The town of military pilots stand among the tundra near Norilsk, and according to some reports, it has never been inhabited. The secrecy of such objects does not allow to collect complete information, but it is known that the 9-story houses were intended for military pilots and their families. Next to the houses built, piles stuck out of the ground, which indicated plans to expand the town. Time changed, and so do the plans. The built town was not in demand, and the houses lost among the picturesque scenery were uninhabited.
11,
Neftegorsk, Sakhalin region. Until 1970, the city of oil workers in the Sakhalin region was called the East, and the decision to build it near the oil fields was taken in 1962. The short history of Neftegorsk broke in May 1995, when residential and administrative buildings were destroyed by an earthquake. The houses could not withstand, and the strong tremors literally formed. It was decided not to restore the city, but to relocate the surviving people to other settlements.
12,
Ammerm, Nenets Autonomous District. In 1933, a town with a beautiful named Ammerm was founded in the bordered zone, which means Walrus Rookery in Nenets. The working town owes its appearance to the deposit of melting feldspar, which began to the activity extracted in the early 30s, and after the war, new deposits were discovered. In the 90s, the mining of valuable mineral practically stopped, and people, losing for source of income, began to leave the inhabited places. Many wooden 2- and 3-story houses now stand empty. In 2004, Ammerm lost its status of a city.
13,
Kadykchan, Magadan Oblast. In the bases of the Ural River, there is an abandoned town, the name of which of the Evan languages means small gorge. Kadykchan studied its history during the Great Patriotic War. It was at that time when coal mining started here. In 1996, the most powerful explosion took place in the mine. 7 people became victims of it. The accident brought great destruction of the mine, and it was decided to close it. Because of the lack of work, people started leaving this terrible place. In 2010, the last inhabitants left the forgotten town, and today it is a ghost town, interesting only the serious stalkers.
14,
Charonda, Vologda region. In the 17th century, the garden of Charonda became a full-fledged city with its own cathedral, a pier, and good-natured residents settled among the white silence of the north. Over time, the trade route began to lose its meaning. By the 30s years of 20th century, Charonda has almost lost its former meaning. Houses collapsed, the pier on Lake Volgy fell into disrepair. The church collapsed, and the inhabitants slowly began to leave their dwelling places. By the time the USSR collapsed, the city had kissed the to exit. But such old dead cities attracted historian entrepreneurs in the tourism business. But all projects of revival of a historical place remained on paper.
15,
Mologa, Yaroslavl region. Let's finish our story with a city that can rightfully lead the list of the disappeared cities in Russia. The settlement of Mologa, which dates back to the 12th century, received the status of a country town in 1777. Once a deep village became a prosperous city, but the glorious history of the city, the walls of which witnessed many historical events, cased in 1941, when all residents were moved out of the city. The city, along historical and architectural monuments, was completely flooded in 1946. Then the reservoir of the Rybinsk SDPP was expanded. In recent years, because of a low water from the water began to treat buildings, and the descendants of the young people began to make boat tours to the flood area.